Hi everyone. So one thing that we went over in the beginning of the class was the different categories of instruments, right? We had the Colotomic instruments, the balongan instruments, and the flowering instruments. What I'd like to do is just go a little bit more over the Colotomic instruments category, just to clarify exactly how that's notated, how we listen for that, and exactly how it's organized, because I think that's one of the really important things. What I want people to take away from this class is an understanding of these kind of basic concepts, like bentuk, the concept of form, the concept of saleh, the concept of irama, and this concept of Colotomic, of these instruments which mark the cycle, right? So what these instruments are responsible for doing is marking those important points within a cycle. So that tells us kind of where we are in the overall form. So, just to review, those instruments include the Kethuk, which is marked by a plus sign, the Kempiang, which is either marked by a little hat kind of triangle on top of the number in the balongan, or it's marked by a straight line over the top of a number. Then we have the Kenong, right? And that's marked by, again, the kind of frowning mouth symbol over the top of a number. And then we have gong, which is marked by the circle around a number. And we have kempul, the smaller gongs, marked by the smiling mouth over the top of a number. And finally we have suwukan, which we didn't really talk about that a lot, the suwuhan, which is a medium-sized gong. And that's basically used to replace the large gong when the cycles are moving really quickly. Now, the most important of these, of course, is the large gong, right? The large gong is marking both the beginning and the end of every cycle. So it's really important to be able to hear that when we're playing through a piece, so we know exactly where we are in the form. And if we get lost, we can jump right back in on that large gong. So let's look at a couple different pieces. First of all, I'd like to look back at Lancaran Manyar Sewu, which for that we only looked at the kendang part, but I'd like to look specifically at the Colotomic instruments for Manyar Sewu. And we can look exactly at how that interacts with both the balongan and how it interacts with the kendang part, which we already learned. So let's jump right in and take a look at that piece. Okay, so here we have the notation for Lancaran Manyar Sewu Slendro Manyuro. So we've seen this notation before, but now I'd like to look at it again and just focus specifically on the Colotomic instruments. So let's start just with the gong player. So what is the gong player doing here? So first of all, we have this circle, which indicates the large gong, right? So we have that at the end of the buko and then at the very end of the full composition every time we go through the cycle. In addition, here at the end of all the other lines, we have the suwukan. So in reality, the full form of Lancaran is only 16 beats. But because this is moving so quickly, if we play the large gong at the end of every line, it's going to overwhelm the sound. It's going to get muddy really fast. So instead, for these first three lines, we just use the suwukan, the medium-sized gong. Right now, aside from that, we've got this symbol right here, right? The smiling mouth. So that indicates kempul, the small hanging gongs. Now here, the gong player has a choice of what notes to play. So the hanging gongs, there's quite a lot of them. In the context of this piece, the player is just going to play the exact note that's actually written in the balongan part. So if the balongan is indicating num, the kempul is going to play num. If the balongan is indicating mo, the kempul is going to play mo, etc., etc. So what I'd like to do is listen for a moment to this recording, and we'll watch a video of the gong part specifically for this piece, so you can get an idea of how it works. In addition, I'd like you to pay attention to how it relates to the kendang part, particularly in these top three lines. So if you remember in the kendang part for Lancaran Manyar Sewu, we were playing for these top three lines, we were playing what's called the pokok. So tung 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 dang tung 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 dang tung 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 dang tung tung. So you'll notice that for these first 3 lines, the dang actually coincides perfectly with the kempul part. And then on the last line, we have a totally different kendang part, right? Dang tung tung, dang tung tung, dang tung tung, dang tung tung tung, dang tung tung. Now what that does is create a certain sense of instability as we move towards this final gong, and then things kind of settle into this final gong as we come back to the normal tung dang tung tung, heading towards that gong part. So this is really common to kind of create a sense of unbalance and then a sense of arrival as we reach this final gong part. Okay, so let's listen to this for a few cycles and just pay attention specifically to the gong player's part and how it interacts both with the balongan and with the kendang part. Okay, now the other part of the Colotomic instruments that we need to take a look at are Kenong, Kethuk, and Kenong. So you might remember from that very first week, I mentioned that if there are enough players, Kethuk Kenong will be played by one person, and Kenong will actually be played by a different person. But if the number of players is limited, then in that situation, the Kethuk, Kenong, and Kenong would all be played by one person, right? So in this case, the Kethuk, Kenong, Kenong are all played by one person. Now, if we look at this notation here above the notes, you notice all of these symbols are only indicated on the first line, but they continue for every line, right? So this pattern is exactly the same for all 4 lines here, yeah? Another thing you'll notice is the symbol for Kenong is nowhere to be found, right? That is because in Lancaran form, we do not use the Kenong. The only thing that's used is the Kethuk. And you'll notice here, it's played on all of these offbeats, right? So we have to, nong, 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 nong. And Kenong will also join in playing every single time we have a gong note, right? So this pattern is really continuous. The Kethuk playing on the offbeats, and the Kenong playing on all of these onbeats. Yeah? Now, Kethuk, Kenong, each of those are only one kettle, right? So you only have one choice for what you're playing. But the Kenong actually has a separate instrument, a separate pot for each note, right? So again, we have a choice. Now the Kenong is a little bit different than the kempul. Instead of just reading the number that it's directly above, when we're in a really fast tempo like this, the Kenong is actually going to anticipate the coming saleh, right? So it's going to anticipate where we're going in terms of goal tones. So the Kenong kind of treats each one of these 8-beat groups as kind of a single gotro, right? Kind of a single grouping. So basically, here and here, I'll be playing the note 3, lu, as we're moving towards this sele. And then here and here, I'll be playing the note mo. So here I won't play 3, I'll play 5. And what that's doing is anticipating this goal tone that we're moving towards, right? So all of our instruments are in different ways based on where we're going, right? Where we're going, not where we currently are. So this sele principle is really what's guiding everything, yeah? So what I'd like to do is listen one more time, take a look at the Kenong part and listen to how it's interacting with the balongan part. How each time we have, again, stable, 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 and then we have this moment of instability, and then returning to stability as we move towards the gong. So this is a really common characteristic and something you kind of find in almost every elaborating instrument in some way or another, yeah, and in Colotomic instruments in particular. So let's take a listen to the Kethuk and Kenong playing in conjunction with the balongan. All right, so were you able to hear how that Kenong is kind of anticipating the sele notes as we move towards the gong? I hope so. Now let's take a look one last time just at a video which shows us all of the Colatomic instruments playing together, right? Now, what I'd like you to focus on here specifically is how the Kethuk, the Kenong, and the Kempul are all kind of interacting. In particular, we've got this Kethuk kind of emphasizing in between these balongan notes. And then we have the Kempul and Kenong actually alternating, right? So the Kenong is always emphasizing the downbeats. The Kempul is emphasizing these, not exactly off beats, but the weaker beats. And then finally, once we arrive at the gong tone at the end of each line, they play at the same time. We have the gong playing together with the Kenong, right? Okay, so let's take a listen at everything all together. All right, so hopefully you're able to tell a little bit how the Colatomic instruments are marking out the structure of this piece. Now, for every Lancaran, the format is exactly the same, right? So for every Lancaran, we're going to have this to, nong, to, pul, to, nong, to, pul, to, nong, to, pul, to, gong, to, nong, to, pul, to, nong, to, pul, to, nong, to, pul, to, gong. It's the exact same for every Lancaran. Really, the only difference is going to be how many lines do we have. So this particular piece has 4 lines, but other Lancaran may only have 1, they may have 2. It varies from one piece to the next. So that's basically it. Now, if you're looking at the notation from the other pieces that we've learned in this class, right, Puspuarno, Wulujeng, anything like that, a lot of times you'll notice that the Colatomic instruments are not all completely written into the notation. Now, part of the reason for that is because any gamelan musician who's reading this notation already knows, right? Kempul, Kethuk, Kempiang, Kenong, these go the exact same place for every piece called Ladrang, or for every piece called Ketawang, right? So writing in all of those individual symbols is a little bit redundant, right? They already know where it goes just by looking at the name of the piece, right? So it's not entirely necessary to write it in all the time. But in any case, in that very first lecture in the PowerPoint that we provided, which I think is in the week 5 folder for CCLE, you'll find that there is written out the Colatomic instrument structure for each of these simple forms, for Ketawang, Lancaran, and Ladrang. So even if the notation is not written in for the Colatomic instruments, you can look and see exactly where they go just based on the name of the form. All right, so hopefully Colatomic instruments are a little bit more clear now. So if you have time at some point, take a look at those other pieces that we learned and listen specifically for the Colatomic instruments. Listen to when the form stretches out, when the irama slows down or changes, how the relative speed of those Colatomic instruments also changes, right? So when we go into slower irama, the Colatomic instruments are also slowing down. The Colatomic instruments are not going to subdivide at all. So that's really the best way to tell what irama we're actually in. So hopefully all of that makes sense. Take a look at some of those older pieces and see if you can listen in to what the Colatomic instruments are playing.